Hi, I want to welcome you and thank you for streaming this message today. I'm really glad that you joined us. At Bailey Christian Church, it matters to us that you feel welcomed, like that this is family. Whether you're young or not so young, my hope is that you'll encounter Jesus, and that as you encounter Jesus, you'll find encouragement to live a life of faith for Him. If you're new with us today, I would love if you wouldn't mind filling out the Connect card that is linked here, or going to baileychristianchurch.com and letting us know who you are, if you have any questions that we can follow up with, or even if you have a prayer concern and you'd like somebody to pray for you, we'd love to know so that we can connect with you. If you're in the area sometime, in the Bailey area, we'd love to have you join us in person. And the reason I invite you into that is because we're called not just to experience a message, but actually to live a life of faith in the context of community. And so we'd love for you to be a part of what's happening here at Bailey. And if you want to know more about how you can get plugged in to what's happening here, again, go back to baileychristianchurch.com, check things out, and if we can help you, we would love to follow up with you as well. I hope today that you're blessed through this message. Accurately. Mark chapter 5, beginning in verse 21. When Jesus had again crossed over by boat to the other side of the lake, a large crowd gathered around him while he was by the lake. And then one of the synagogue leaders named Jairus came, and when he saw Jesus, he fell at his feet. He pleaded earnestly with him, "My little daughter is dying. Please come and put your hands on her so that she will be healed and live." And so Jesus went with him. So that's the throng of the crowds heading with him to Jairus' house. And a large crowd followed, and they pressed around him. And a woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years. She had suffered a great deal under the care of many doctors and had spent all she had, yet instead of getting better, she got worse. When she heard about Jesus, she came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak, because she thought, if I just touch his clothes, I will be healed. Immediately her bleeding stopped, and she felt in her body that she was freed from her suffering. And at once Jesus realized that power had gone out from him. He turned around in the crowd and he asked, "Who touched my clothes?" "You see the people crowding against you," his disciples answered, "and yet you can ask, who touched me?" But Jesus kept looking around to see who had done it. And then the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell at his feet, and trembling with fear, told him the whole truth. He said to her, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering." My guess is, even as I read some of that, your mind went to the images that you just saw. And that's good. That's by intention, because I think sometimes we read stories and they're kind of flat, and we don't realize that these are real people struggling with real issues and real needs and desperate to find an answer. And all of a sudden we realize they're not all that different than us. And so I want to take this woman's story and tie it to the story of all of us when it comes to our need for salvation. Not that these are the only 3 steps, but I think I identified 3 in particular. 3 steps that are often part of what it is to come to salvation. And the first is this, the very first step, and we see that clearly depicted, is desperation. And I say desperation because what's happening here is that when we are desperate enough, that we're often most likely then to reach out to Jesus. When we're desperate enough, We're finally ready to reach out. Let's look at this situation. You have a father here, and though the focus isn't on Jairus and his daughter, but it begins there. Jairus is desperate because his daughter is dying and he doesn't have an answer. This woman has tried every option available. She's reached out to all the doctors and done everything that she can, and she is on her last rope. See what's going on with this woman. If it just says that she'd been subject to bleeding for 12 years. We don't know all the details there, but here's what that would have meant. It may have meant that she was never able to marry. Or it may have meant that if she was married, that she was divorced. Because in the Jewish law, if somebody was subject to bleeding, that made them unclean to be in the temple. They were ceremonially unclean. There's a whole process involved in cleansing. Not only that, but when she would touch somebody, they would become unclean as well. So keeping that in mind, think of her pressing through the crowd. Think of the desperation that it caused to say, I don't care about that. And here's a woman that really is so desperate. She had gone to all the doctors that she could find in the ancient world. And not only did she not get better, she actually got worse, and she was left with nothing. And I have to understand in the ancient world, it didn't really have a standard of what qualified as doctor, so to speak. You had people who may have known some herbal remedies and would have known some biology, but it was often mixed with folklore and with superstition. And so she went to one after the other and just got worse and worse and more destitute. She tried it all and nothing had helped. I think that's true for some of you today. That you've been down all the different avenues looking for an answer to whatever it is, whether it's peace or recovery or maybe the feeling of guilt to be cleansed, and somehow you just keep going and then the line moves on you. And you get there where you think it's really going to be the answer, only to find out it isn't there, and you're even worse than when you started. And then you hear about Jesus, and you reach out. See, that's my hope for you today. Some of you know that story. That was your story, rewritten over and over again in each of our lives. But for some of you, you need that to be a part of your story. And so I just want to say this. If you are at the end of your rope, what do you got to lose? You've tried everything else. Maybe it's time to actually reach out to Jesus and find that there really is an answer to your desperate need. Well, there's a second step. Once there's a desperation. Now, not everybody comes in the midst of desperation. Some realize just naturally, nope, this is the step I need to take. But for some of us, it really is, I'm at the end of the rope. But either way, as you move into relationship with Jesus, what you'll discover is deep love. You move from desperation to deep love. That is, when we finally do reach out, we encounter the deep love that Jesus has for us. In fact, this is often what leads us to reach out in the first place, because we trust that He will accept and love us. We've heard stories about Him, and maybe it's true, and I'm desperate enough that I'm gonna put it all on Jesus. I want you to notice, when we talk about the deep love of Jesus, I want you to notice His compassion. His willingness. He is in the midst of a really important journey. He's going to save the life of a little girl. And yet, in the midst of all of that, He stops everything. He stops the throng. He pauses. He presses pause for a second. And He says, hold on. And He draws His attention to the one. He draws his attention to the one who, out of fear, crept up behind him. And I want you to understand a little bit about this woman and why this is such a significant thing. Because not only was she unclean, she would have typically avoided crowds like this. Or once people knew about her, like the man off to the side, people would have avoided her. Once they knew what was going on and who she was, that she was subject to bleeding, they would have called out unclean. She would have been a pariah. She would have been pushed to the fringes and the edges of society. And so she sneaks up on Jesus and touches the hem of his garment. And Jesus stops it all for her. What's amazing with Jesus is what would have typically made people unclean, leprosy, sicknesses like this, other types of things, where in the Old Testament, when you touched somebody or they touched you, then you became unclean. But with Jesus, it's the reverse. With Jesus, his cleanness rubs off on her. His purity rubs off on her. And so he pays attention to the one saying, I came just for this one. I'll press pause on this little girl for a second because I have one right here in the midst of desperation. But then he calls her out. Why does Jesus call her out? Now, it may be that Jesus, he's fully God and he's fully human, so it's possible that he isn't fully aware. He knows that something has happened, but he doesn't know who it is or exactly what has happened, or he knows that power has gone out. Or it may be that he knows full well. I think either are possible. He's fully God, but he's fully man, so there are some things he doesn't always immediately have full knowledge of in that moment. But it's also this: Jesus is not like a magic rabbit's foot. It's not like you touch him and you get healing just by that. Lots of people were touching him, but something significant transpired between this woman who had faith in Jesus. And so Jesus is not doing magic here. Through her faith, she's reaching out. And so maybe, quite possibly, Jesus, in full knowledge, calls her out for her sake. It's almost like in the garden when God says, Adam, where are you? God not know where Adam is? No, he's saying that for Adam's sake to step out of darkness. And so this woman, because she can't hide any longer, steps up and says, it was me. And so Jesus is looking for her because he wants to acknowledge her. He's not concerned merely to perform a task. It's about the person. He's not just concerned that she gets healed. He's concerned that she gets loved. He's concerned that she know who has done this and why. As one scholar put it, he forces the issue so that when she leaves healed, she will leave knowing that the one who healed her knows her and cares for her. She is a person who is worth taking time with and addressing. In fact, here's what we see. He calls her daughter. That's significant. It's significant, particularly in a Jewish culture. He's saying, she's a daughter of Israel. But he's welcoming her back into the family. He said, you're a daughter. You're my daughter. Some of you this morning are badly in need of the acceptance of Jesus. Some of you are badly in need of his forgiveness because you can't even bring yourself to accept you. It's possible that it feels like there's just such a filth in the background. It's too dirty. I'm too far gone. I'm too broken. In fact, I think that's what makes Christ so attractive, because what Jesus genuinely offers is forgiveness. In fact, I think the challenge in the world today for people outside of Christ is that sense of, I'm trying to feel forgiven. I'm trying to be forgiven, and I can't get there. I can't offer it to myself, and nobody else will extend it to me. And so Jesus breaks into the midst of the crowd. He pauses everything, and he says, I am offering you forgiveness. And you need the deep love of Jesus. But there may be some of you that are hearing me this morning and going, from where I stand, things are pretty good. I don't feel all that bad about much of anything, and finances are good, and life seems to be all right. And so for you, there isn't a desire to reach out because why? Things aren't really all that messed up. And so I just want to say this. The reality is you are lost in that you are broken, you just won't admit it, or you don't realize it yet. Or maybe to put it another way, you're not desperate enough yet. And if that's you, let me just, I want to pause for a second. I want to warn you that God loves you enough that if you wait longer, you may find He lets you drop even farther until you have nowhere else to go. And you can decide, however, that now that enough is enough, that you know what, I don't want to get any more desperate. I don't want to become more miserable, but I just want to let you know God's willing for that to happen if it means that you will finally realize that He's your only answer. And so I just want to kind of break into the midst of where you're at and say, you have an opportunity to turn now rather than wait till it gets even worse. Desperation leads to deep love, and then finally, it leads to deliverance. It leads to deliverance. You see, what Jesus intends for us to experience is deliverance. Prior to this part of the story, prior to this passage, Jesus had delivered on the other side of the lake. He had delivered a demoniac, a man that was demon-possessed. He couldn't be controlled. People chained him out near the tombs. They kind of guarded him because he was a madman, because the demons would so overwhelm others, and he would break the chains. And He heals him. And then you have a woman here who has been through the care of multiple doctors, and there's nothing they can do. The doctors can't cure her. And then at the end of this story, though we didn't read it, Jesus then will heal the daughter who will have passed away, who will have died. Jairus' daughter, He will raise her from the dead, from which there was no hope. So in all of this, Mark is trying to make very clear that Jesus is the deliverer. He's God come in human flesh, ready and able to deliver. Now let me highlight something here real quickly. This is on your insert. I want to turn my attention real specifically to physical healing for a moment. Physical healing may or may not happen. I believe in a God who does and can do miracles. But He doesn't always choose to do that. But I want to help you keep it in perspective. Keep in mind that even if we were to get healed from some sickness or disability, we will all eventually die. And here's the key. The healing is meant as just a foretaste of the kingdom to come. Even when Jesus healed Lazarus and raised Lazarus from the dead, Lazarus would eventually go on to die finally. But it was a foretaste to say the king has come, the kingdom is breaking in, and there's more to come down the road, but I want you to know that the one who can do that all is right here in your midst. But I want to give you one other thing that's most clear from Scripture, is that we can all be delivered from sin. Whether or not we all get a healing that we're crying out for, a miracle that we're looking for, we can all find forgiveness. You see, what Jesus does on the cross is address the core problem of this broken world, which is sin. It's what leads to sickness and to death. Now, when I say that, I want you to understand what I mean by that. No, not every sickness we get is due to our own personal sin or lack of faith, but it's traced back to how the world became broken due to the entrance of sin from the very beginning. So that when by His stripes we are healed, Scripture says, it points to the total reversal of all that is less than what God intended. At the end of the Bible, in Revelation 21, second to last chapter, it says there will be no more crying, no more tears, no more death, no more pain. In other words, the old order of things that was broken due to sin will be reversed. And so Jesus breaking in and going to the cross and the empty tomb, he points us to the day when that will one day happen. And so here's the cool thing. That is available to all of us. That's the message of salvation. And the words that Jesus offers at the end of this passage can become your words, where he says, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering." Now, what's interesting about this word peace is that he's not just simply saying, goodbye. This word peace has much deeper roots. I highlighted this last week. It's from the Hebrew understanding of shalom. And shalom is more than just a simple word of peace. It has a fuller, richer meaning. It means wholeness. It means well-being. It means prosperity and security and friendship and salvation. And so when Jesus is telling this woman that, he's speaking to us as well. He's saying that this is the peace that points toward the deliverance and blessing that Jesus intends for all of us. Jesus wants to speak those words over all of us. Now, I mentioned about physical healing. While not everyone who prays to God for physical healing will be healed this side of heaven, sometimes he does choose to step in and intervene, and we get to witness it. I want to share with you a story this morning. Some of you are already part of, some of you are already familiar with. It's Jack and Marla's story, Marla in particular, but it's their story together. And I want you to listen to the witness of what God has done in their lives. Well, I'm glad to get a chance to talk with you, Jack and Marla. And I know a lot of folks here at Bailey have kind of watched your journey through some really dark times and valleys. But not everybody knows that story and then what's come about here in recent weeks. And so begin a little bit with kind of walk us back through where you were, over the last couple of years and what was going on physically and emotionally.
For like 10 years now, or 10 years I had been diagnosed with Parkinson's and had Parkinson's, and then I had, because of the autonomic dysfunction, I ended up on oxygen. Could barely walk to the bathroom and back, and 4 liters of oxygen. And
and then, what was it, a couple of years ago, then you ended up in, how long ago was it that you ended up in St. Mary's and then down in?
I was in, I kept having delusional thoughts. Can be with the Parkinson's too, but and I ended up in mental hospitals quite a few times. And some of them were very abusive, but people,
go ahead.
But I talked to people about God, and several people accepted God in their hearts.
So while you were even in those settings, you were able to be a witness, even as you're kind of trying to make sense of what's going on. And I know some of those experiences there were not good. The care wasn't great, and at times they had different ideas about what ought to be done. And I know Jack as well, this has been a rough journey trying to figure things out. What was that last 10 years like for you?
A lot of ups and downs. Just kind of trying to make sense of things when they didn't make any sense at all.
Yeah. It was pretty confusing at times to try to nail down just what all was.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, when you can't explain to somebody that you're actually not trying to do something to them and they don't understand it, it's kind of hard to deal with that at times. But
yeah, because part of that challenge was almost a sense of paranoia of what was happening at home and really kind of brought a wedge between the two of you. You want to say anything about that, Marna?
Yeah, well, I even ended up leaving and going in a woman's home because I was leaving them because I really thought he was trying to poison my food.
Yeah. So you have all of this going on. There's the physical stuff, the mental, emotional stuff, but behind it all, there was spiritual things going on. Tell us. I know you have a couple of incidences where you ended up being taken by an ambulance. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, the first time I was couldn't breathe good, so I went and having heart issues and went to the hospital in an ambulance, and the ambulance driver prayed over me, and God told me through the prayer that I was healed, but yet I never accepted that. And I stayed. Well, I tried to go off my meds, but then like people were telling me, no, you got to get back on more Parkinson's meds. You need to see your doctor first. And so I was kind of like got right back into the Parkinson thing, and didn't really have enough faith.
Well, it sounds like it was hard to know what was spiritual, what was even, part of the challenge of the medicine itself, interacting, and, confusing to know what really is going on physically. And then you ended up in the ambulance again.
And another time in the same ambulance, or medic or whatever.
Yeah.
And so he prayed over me again, and the same thing, that I was healed from my Parkinson's. There was spiritual warfare, but this time he told me, something keeps telling me Joy. And I said, because it's my middle name. So I think that was God's way to personalize it. And that time I went off my meds, and now I'm walking. I made my goal, and I walked 6 miles the other day.
Wow. Well, I remember when you came back, and it took a while to, as you were coming off of that and figuring out what's going on with, at home, whether Jack was, really trying to hurt you. And I know the elders had a chance to come over and pray for you and over you guys both. Where did you start to see things change for both of you?
After that is a lot of the stuff in my mind was spiritual warfare, because after you guys all came and prayed over me, that it cleared my mind too. Well,
and Jack, I remember one of the worship, extended worship times that we did after a service, and there were probably other times in the past I heard you pray, but that was one that stood out to me. All of a sudden I heard you praying. How has this affected you spiritually?
Well, quite a bit. I was kind of lost in my last 10 years of dealing with all the other stuff, and I really wasn't praying all that much like I probably should have been. And so when things started getting better, I started praying more. So
and you both started praying
he
together.
prays with me now, and we do devotions together, and it changed a lot.
So you're not on the oxygen anymore.
No.
Do you have any more of the shakes or any of the?
No, I'm off all the meds for that. Not only that, my heart meds are gone, my blood pressure meds are gone. Yeah, when I went to the doctor, he said, I can't explain this other than it's some kind of miracle.
Wow.
Yeah. Wow. And then I went to the pulmonologist, and she did an oxygen saturation test, and it stayed at 98, 99 the whole time.
Wow.
And same thing, she can't explain. but I can. I know.
Yeah. Well, what if you were to kind of speak to others who have different challenges, whether physical, emotional, and spiritual work? God has made us as a whole person, so all those things interact with each other. What would your word of encouragement be to those who kind of find themselves in a really dark place?
Don't give up. Keep praying.
Yeah.
Keep in the Word. When I was when I was in the hospital, one of the times, I had marked a bunch of, with just tissue paper, because that's all I could get, and marked a couple verses, and one is Genesis 26:24. Oh, it's just this part of it that I have. Do not be afraid, for I am with you, and I will bless you. And he did that. And Exodus 14:14. The Lord himself will fight for you. Just stay calm. And then 2 Kings 25. I have heard your prayer and seen your tears, and I will heal you. And I thought he meant mentally at the time, because I was in a mental hospital, but he healed me totally.
Well, having watched this journey and been a part of it, it really is an amazing story of and confusing at times, all the way around, trying to figure out. Sometimes it's not easy to discern what God is saying and what he's not and what's happening, and because especially you throw in some medicines with that and as well, and but in it all, God has moved and done an amazing thing, and I want to thank you for telling your story, but I know that you really have a heart to want to tell other people about that. And so I want to invite you all, if you have other questions, you want to follow up and just talk with Jack and Marla, share in their story and celebrate with them. I want to invite you to do that. Some of you have probably already done that. But if you have some needs in any of those areas, physical, spiritual, emotional, we believe that God is a God who is the same yesterday, today, and forever, and can move miraculously. Doesn't always choose to move in the same way, and so we don't get to tell God what to do, but we can cry out to him and trust that there are still amazing stories to be written, and one of those stories just might be yours too. And you might have a story of how God has moved in an amazing way, maybe even miraculous in your life, and you want to share that with others. We would love to hear your stories. I think we grow as we hear God working in the lives of one another. On the app, you can actually go there, and there's a spot where you can share your story, your testimony, or if you want to stop by the office and check in with us, and we would love to either to video it or to hear it, or if you want to write it down, however you feel comfortable. We would love to tell your story too. God is the same yesterday, today, and forever. Just to kind of put a bow on the end of this, my question for you is, how about you? Have you reached out to Jesus for deliverance in your life? I want you to know that he loves you deeply, even when you feel like you're unlovable. It only takes one person to love you for that to not be true. And so I just want to let you know that he loves you deeply. And, my question would be, why not today?
Hey, I'm Joel Malone, one of the elders here at Bailey Christian Church. We are so glad you joined us online today. Thank you for streaming on whatever platform you're using. Just remember to drop us a note and let us know that you are here and watching, and we would love to have you visit us in person sometime. Our doors are always open. If you have any needs or prayer concerns, just go to our website and check us out there, send us a message, and we'd be happy to be in contact with you. Have a great week.